Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another installment of Roundtable Podcast. Shogun is not here today. It's me, Jigmo. Thank you for joining us for a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful, exciting podcast in regards to hyperspace, the great revealing and alien discourse with TheCNOshaman, Crimsonraven, and Sir Eggbased. I hope you gentlemen are doing well. Would any of you like to start us off as to what this topic concerns and make some initial remarks?
I am doing well, thank you, Jigmo. I hope the same can be said for you. And I won't speak for Mr. Raven and Techno here, but I'm doing quite well myself. Good.
I'm doing well myself.
Fantastic. Glad to hear we're all on the same page. So I'm not quite certain what hyperspace is meant to entail. I'm going to assume that it's referring to interdimensionality, which we
Correct.
can discuss all we want. As far as I know, Techno and I are not exactly in as much on the same page as Crimsonraven and I are. We have a lot of similar beliefs, but I think the interesting part of today's discussion is that Techno and I and Crimsonraven and I each have a broad and vast collection of self-drawn conclusions, all of which seem to be basically symmetrical. So whenever that occurs, Jung said when you have three coincidences that are connected in a meaningful fashion, that the chance probability of that occurring is so astronomically impossible that the root cause must be an underlying acausal connecting principle. And he called that synchronicity. So we are at the center of a synchronicity with the three of us. And go ahead, please.
I'd like to maybe use a slight definition shift with hyperdimensionality, referring to more of a space and time beyond which seems to be 4D, but which operates in much higher spaces and interdimensionality, more parallel dimensions akin to the multi-world. Does that seem reasonable?
Absolutely. From my understanding and the rabbit hole that I have deeply dove down, we live in a 15-dimensional time-space matrix comprised of many different layers of reality that are separated by basically by electron spin, and the angle of electron spin, the rate of electron spin, and basically the big part is the frequency and the angle, and because of how this type of advanced etheric light that all of reality operates on, it has this amazing ability to exist in these states of quantum superposition, which allows for dimensional layering to occur in the first place.
Well, I think that's beautifully stated. The most interesting part about that for me is that you're basing all of it on the single subatomic particle, the electron. That's very interesting to me because, of course, when you describe like a 15th dimensional thing, I don't think that you're talking on the order of electrons at all. So perhaps you could elaborate.
Well, basically the idea is that certain properties of each dimension are set to a certain variable difference that allows them to not mix together. So they can exist at the exact same time in the exact same space, but just like you can't mix water and oil, they'll always stay separated and they'll never actually interact with each other.
I think you run into interesting temporalities as well, because already in quantum physics, in quantum physics, imaginary time is utilized, and I've been reflecting on an idea that may even expand upon such, known as quaternion time, which it's still a very young idea, and I'm I'm just contemplating how a 4D
as I was saying, so the brain contains these time cells per se. They haven't made a name for them. I'm sure they'll call them something interesting like temporaneous perceptive neurons or something. But these time cells are much like the timer in a cell phone. If you take it out, it can't iterate things, so it can't work correctly. Much in the same way that if we couldn't perceive time, it would cripple us severely because we're beings that operate on sentience. So if you're a unicellular organism, you don't necessarily need iterative consciousness. There's like one direction in which you can travel. There are maybe 2 or 3 functions which you can execute. And that's a very interesting experience, having had it under certain circumstances myself. But insofar as we can perceive time, we presume that it operates in the same way in which we perceive it. And this isn't even true to begin with. So if we're going to have this discussion, we need to disestablish that presupposition immediately, right off the bat. So
I think that was just shown because the Sagu said the prop dropped out before it dropped out, which was quite interesting.
I think that might have been an internet connection thing.
Could be.
I like it though. I like it.
Yeah, that is very fascinating. I do have a question for you, Sir Based. Do you take the opportunity for us to misperceive time as evidence that we don't have any access to time, or only that we have limited access to time? How far do you take that conclusion?
I think time as we describe it is a function of our consciousness. So it's a human design for human purposes. We have full access to that. It's within our domain because we can assess it. We can measure the function of time as far as we are aware. And we create a measurement, fiat, for the purposes of measuring our time. And that's useful for us. Then you go beyond that to say that true time, well, what actually is that? And ultimately, it's causality. That's all that it is. It's the connection between things that we perceive at a certain speed. I'd like to hear from Crimsonraven, provided that answers your question, Jigmo.
Yeah, I had a follow-up, but I think it's better that you stick to the general vicinity here.
Why don't you hold that thought, and we'll hear from Crimson.
So okay, since what we want to do right now is we want to get a better understanding of time, I will share my perception of time with you. So, time, although we experience it linearly because we are within the time-space matrix, it is completely non-linear to anything outside of our time-space matrix, which means like hyper-advanced, extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional intelligences that may, be observing us. Now, with that said, time does not exist. Although, Einstein would want to tell you that the 4th dimension is time, and that's completely incorrect. And I very much agree with what Eggbase said, that our perception of time is directly connected to consciousness. And basically, time doesn't exist. The only thing that ever does exist is the now present moment. The past is a result of basically cached data, and the future is a result of conscious simulations, essentially.
And quantum physics mixed with relativity touches on this in the sense that the quantum physics is discrete in nature, while relativity is continuous in nature, yet somehow both operate in a paradoxical fashion.
If I may, I'm personally not fully tracking what the argument against time is. If somebody could elaborate, because if the argument is that our consciousness affects our perception of time, therefore we're misperceiving. Well, our consciousness also affects our understanding of chairs and tables and all sorts of macro objects. But
perhaps I can respond, Jigmo. The argument against time is that it's a function of our neurological, architectures. It's a function of the way in which our neurons are wired to each other. It's not an actual universal function. Causality is an actual universal function of the third dimension, but the subjective description by Einstein of time as a fourth dimension was entirely based in his own inability to perceive outside of his own perspective. So if you acknowledge that, and you look at the absolutely fascinating scientific data which is coming out of particularly some Southwestern American universities, then you'll notice, and you'll notice very clearly if you're astute enough, that time is being proven conclusively to be a function of our biology, not even of our consciousness, simply of our biology. Linear time, as we know it, provided that it is going at 1 second per second, the speed of time that we describe, is a human biological function. It is nothing else.
I may be out of my depth here, but could the same argument not be made for our understanding of causality? If not, why not?
No, I don't believe so. It's an interesting philosophical question, and it will drive us back into the agent causality argument. I'd like for Crimson to respond to that.
So basically, my position on it is time is a byproduct of measurement, right? The only reason that we have a clock and we have a calendar and anything is because we measure the cycles of the sun and the other luminaries and the zodiac, the stars. And because of our measurement, we have basically invented the idea of time, or the construct of time. But in reality, time doesn't exist, just secular repeating variables exist.
Maybe that interaction is more fundamental, and then even with interaction and information, through the studies of on the edge of physics of black holes and the holographic idea that maybe information is more fundamental because they're finding aspects of computer science showing up in the description of the event horizon of black holes.
So, yeah, exactly. Jigmo, I wanted to quickly present you with a response. Our understanding of causality can be equally erroneous to our understanding of time. The difference is that causality is usually understood to be a cause and then an effect. So your argument that the same could be said for causality is ultimately true and factual and correct, but only because our understanding of causality is usually informed by our linear understanding of time. So it's a vicious cycle. We understand time to be linear, therefore we understand causality to be X and then Y, when in fact time is non-linear, and it can be X and then Y in as much as it can be Y and then X. And it can also be Y equals X equals Z. It can be a completely horizontal transition through causality, where events can correspond in ways which we're not aware of necessarily, because we can only perceive them in a linear fashion. I have all sorts of novel terms for that, but yeah, go ahead, Techno.
To elaborate on that concept, the idea I've been playing with, the quaternion time, you would describe the linear time as we perceive it as the real axis, and then I, J, and K. The imaginary axis, and then use quaternion functions to morph between them. And the I, J, and K would be different aspects of sideways time, moving perpendicular to each other, yet interacting with each other.
Although I've never heard of, although I've heard of people trying to reduce time to causality or causal notions, I've never heard the vice versa, causality being reduced to time. In every paper I ever read on the possibility of backwards causation, nobody ever says time is linear, therefore backwards causation is impossible. There's some further set of considerations that is usually put forth. I guess I'm not seeing why somebody couldn't have the view that time is linear and backwards causation is possible, and the two are unrelated to each other in any way.
Okay, so how do we perceive backwards causation with our understanding of linear time? How do we draw a causal linkage between an event in the future and a subsequent event in the past, if we can only perceive time from past to future?
It's true that we may be perceiving the effect first and the cause second, but I think on both primitive understanding of causality and a counterfactual understanding of causality is coherent to hold that something in the future fixes some event in the past instead of the other way around. And maybe I'm not understanding your question. It's true that we would perceive it backwards, but how is us perceiving it backwards make a problem for the view?
I'm sorry, Techno, go ahead, please.
This hints at the idea of universe hopping. The idea that when we touched on the subject of interdimensionality, how you can bounce between worlds and universes, and
it what?
I've had various hints of such happening, and I don't know
Like
you've
experienced like shifting from one parallel reality into another.
Yes.
Yeah, I have also experienced similar things.
I've also experienced similar things.
Yes, and usually it comes with a high state of conscious awareness. You'll notice small variables that were very clearly previously different. Like, for example, one time where I first noticed it had happened, I had noticed that a sign that I drove by every single day for years, all of a sudden had a completely different color order. It was the same colors, but the order was different. And coincidentally, all of a sudden, everybody that I saw and what clothes they were wearing and what colors and what orders of the colors that people were wearing, it was very interesting. It completely coincided with this entire new color order that was in that reality compared to the one that I was in before. It was a very subtle difference.
Has it occurred to you that part of that is pattern recognition, and that it's may even be impossible for some individuals to recognize this, and that it may be happening unwittingly to people who are of a lower level of consciousness?
Absolutely.
So that would then counter it tends to happen at a higher state of consciousness. I think it happens very often. I think that the mechanism of free will is to jump between predetermined realities. And that's actually the only way in which we can decide things. Is, like there's a reality where when I walk down the stairs in 2 hours, I fall down them and break my neck just because my fucking foot slips. It's not this reality. I'm not going to fall down the stairs, but there is one where that does happen. And so things like you can make a decision. You can't decide to have a novel experience, or, well, you can from your subjective. You can't decide to do something that's never happened before because it's already happened. You can simply decide that your conscious experience is going to be on one outcome instead of another. So that requires you to basically fall down a separate path. And whether or not that path began when you made the decision or began at the beginning has been progressing, and you made a lateral shift onto it. If you laterally moved onto a different reality with a decision you made in the present, the past of that reality could be entirely different, usually by small details. For instance, the order of clothing or some person's Instagram post. Like the other day, I looked in this girl's Instagram post that she had posted 2 weeks ago, and I remembered distinctly that it was 2 weeks ago. It was posted 3 days ago instead, and it was very evidently the same post. It had the same people having commented on it. It just had advanced by 11 days into the future. So I was like, now that's interesting. And I even checked up with some people. I was like, well, is it possible X, Y happened? Is it possible the app has glitched? And then you investigate it a little bit, and then once you recognize this phenomenon a couple times, you're done investigating.
So the interesting thing I was going to say about your experience there is if it was the exact same people with the exact same comments, but clearly posted on a different day, it would be a very subtle difference that most people wouldn't notice. And from my understanding, So I think I'm going to need a little bit of a preface that I have to explain before I get into my.
Please go ahead.
So essentially, time, everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen, has all already happened from a higher
Based.
dimensional perspective. So since we are a byproduct of this time-space matrix and we are forced to be within its confines, we are forced to experience time in a linear fashion. But those that are outside of time, let's say like an extraterrestrial race that has ascended their consciousness beyond time and space to the point where they are, raising little civilization colonies on planets like Earth, they theoretically could run multiple timelines and multiple simulations of cause and effect events. And they could have those simulations go from beginning to end from their perspective in time in, let's say, 10 minutes. But for us, we would have to experience that time in its totality. So we would have to experience, let's say, 20 years, or even from the beginning of time till the end of time. But the higher dimensional entity that is in charge of running these simulations to try and have certain cause-effect goals that they're trying to fulfill for their agendas happen, only a small amount of time relative to them has passed. Even though for us, it could have been 20 years to an entire beginning to end of a universe.
This touches on the concept of matrix time.
And it also kind of goes together with the idea that everything within our omniverse, right? Because there are different levels of it. Everything is layered. And like, for example, like we live on a planet inside of a solar system, inside of a galaxy that's inside of a friggin' cluster of other galaxies that is inside of a universe. And that universe is inside of a multiverse. And that multiverse is inside...
I think we get the point. Can I make the obligatory ogres are like onions comment?
Sure.
Ogres are like onions, and then you say they smell, and I say no, they have layers. Someone on the internet will get that joke. So yeah, there are a lot of layers to it, and that begins to touch upon the Hermetic principle of correspondence.
Yeah, as above, so below, too.
As within and so without, as with planets, so with solar systems, as with Crimsonraven, so with Crimsonraven's unnecessarily long illustrations of the massive nature of the universe. So the interesting thing here is that we're talking about patterns and we're talking about causality. And there's a certain counterfactual or mutually exclusive element to those two descriptions. Because on the one hand, we're saying that things happen because they happen and they're made to happen by certain other things. On the other hand, we state that there are definable patterns with things that happen, that have predictive capacity. So I love reconciling a good paradox because the nature of existence is necessarily paradoxical. And all you have to do is look at baryon asymmetry for that. I mean, fuck, like Sakharov, dude. What a guy. But the issue here is that I am stating at the same time, in the same argument, in probably a logically incoherent way, that there is both the capacity for me to change events within my perception, as far as I'm concerned, to make things happen. And I am also conceding that beyond my capacity, there is a pattern which governs all things. And that all events, all circumstances, all existences, states of being, they are all subject to these universal patterns or archetypes. So the second point is very deterministic. The point that I just presented is very deterministic in nature. However, I believe in free will. So this is an interesting hyperspace discussion in that respect. And I would love to hear one of you, or both of you preferably, or all three of you if we include Jigmo, respond to that.
So who wants to go first?
Rock, paper,
Are we
scissors?
responding to the question of how determinism is compatible with a robust free will? Of the
I'm sorry. Did you ask me to respond to the question?
No, I was just wondering, what was the worry? How is determinism compatible with a robust free will? Was that the inquiry?
How is a universal archetype, which governs things, compatible with a robust free will, agent free will?
So, from my perspective, and this has come through many meditations and asking questions, their free will doesn't even really exist. It is a type of illusion, because the thing is that when these creator gods run these simulations, there is a goal, there is a design, there is a certain outcome they are trying to achieve by running all of these different simulations, alternate realities, parallel timelines, all with different choices being made. Basically, they're all trying to get to the same end goal, and it's the idea that all paths lead to the same destination. Maybe some might take longer, some might be shorter, but eventually, at the end of our time matrix, once we achieve whatever the goal is of the simulation, it will end, and then once the goal is achieved, we will go somewhere else.
So I'm going to present to you as a counter my point that I usually make to people who say something like that about pragmatic argumentation. So I am attempting to express that free will exists insofar as we are concerned. Your counter is that free will does not exist insofar as creator gods are concerned. So that's like saying that a fish can swim in his bowl, but because he cannot escape the bowl, he does not have free will. And it's the difference between decision-making capacity, which would be agent causality, free will, and liberated will, per se, which would be the ability to make whatever choice you want. I think if you can make even one choice, then it's not determinism. If you have the capacity to actually make a decision, and for the result of that decision to have causal consequences, you have free will to some degree. Things impinge on your free will. For instance, my knowledge and experience impinge on my free will. If I were an idiot, and an ignorant one at that, and an inexperienced, ignorant idiot at that, I would have all the free will in the world because I would be held accountable to nothing, perhaps the law, but nothing else. By contrast, however, I have certain experiences which restrict my ability to make whatever decision I want. I am bound by those experiences. So knowledge ultimately is the enemy of causal freedom. If you are responsible, then you are not free. So I don't necessarily see how the universe being deterministic on the order of creator gods, and yet somehow liberated on the order of individual humans, are mutually exclusive. For instance, I don't believe that archangels have free will.
Absolutely not. They also follow the grand design just like we do.
Precisely.
I think paradoxes come into play as well. For example, the whole idea of infinities, where it's both the infinite outside of time and the infinite unfolding itself within time.
From my understanding, when it comes to timeline and timeline manipulation, paradoxes kind of operate as a type of save state. So if, let's say, they had achieved a certain thing, and let's say they wanted to reset it and go back and try again and again and again, but they wanted to run all the current simulations from this point onward because we had achieved a specific goal in the timeline. Basically, they would provide some sort of paradox effect that basically would make it so that all time before that time can no longer be changed because a paradox has been created.
Base, could you maybe you didn't give it, but could you maybe repeat your criteria for what free will is, or what it means for an agent to have free will?
Oh God, Chigmo. So this is what I get for having you like present, is that it's always just going to become a free will thing. So, which is fine, but the esoteric level of philosophy that we usually engage in is not necessarily compatible with the populace. I mean, it's fun for us, not fun for everybody else. So, but sure. I think that free will, in order to have free will, you have to be able to make a decision that has a causal consequence. You have to be able to consciously do something that creates an outcome that would not have happened in your conscious experience if you had not made that decision.
So with
Is
that,
it compatible with that you so if the following statement is true, it could not have been the case that you did not make that decision. That truth is compatible with free action, right? In your view.
If the following statement is true, it is not possible.
So it is not possible that you not have made that decision. Would that still
Could you
be a
do it
free
without
action?
the double negative?
So my point is, if your criteria for free will is you make a decision that comes truly from you and has a causal influence, that leaves the open choices part open. So the question is, if I could not have done anything other than what am I free?
John
If you
John C. Lilly covers the topic in this concept of the Earth coincidence control office, where you control your short-term coincidences, and when you tap into it, it controls the long-term coincidences, and it ties into the galactic. I forget the acronyms he uses, but it's a formulation that it goes up to the universe in its entirety at a certain point and beyond.
I ask within the esoteric framework because if your answer to the question is that yes, you could have done otherwise, then I assume that the universal creator or the creator does not actually guide or control everything. There's some segment of reality they do not control, which is your decision. But if your answer is no, you cannot have done otherwise, then you seem to be a compatibilist. Just fine.
So
I'm just wondering.
there are two gripes that I have with that. So there's creators, and then there's the all. You know what I mean? And the all,
creator.
Yeah, the primus optimus. You know, like the very beginning of all uncaused causes. Yeah. So, yeah, that thing is completely and utterly without free will. There is nothing that it can do that it wasn't already going to do, because it necessarily has to do every single thing that there is.
That's its function, is to create every possibility that could exist.
So that is the only time, unless you are capable of doing all the things, you're necessarily free.
But the interesting...
Because even if you're free by negation, so I've defined positive free will, but there's also negative free will. So, and I think it's a little bit of one and a whole lot of both. So I am free because I'm a very small part of the universe. I'm liberated from all of the other knowledge of it. So my percentage of universal knowledge is fairly low, and thus I have a significant amount of relative ignorance, which leaves me free on that scale. But then there's also positive free will. So I could do things that I wasn't going to do, or whatever you said. But it's relative to timelines. So I couldn't say that I could do things that have never happened before, because I can't. They've all happened. And I can't say that I could do things that haven't happened, that I haven't done in some other possible reality, because I have.
So all things are happening at once.
Yeah, it's a matter of degrees. So within my definition, to the degree that I've described, free will and determinism both exist and are not mutually exclusive in a compatible fashion.
So Crimson is quite frankly an arbitrariness here, in the sense of, and here the forest, and you say, hey, I would plausibly ask you, well, how about grass and fences and how you're acquainted with your free will? your access to your free will to other things, such as experiences. And I don't think I'm being a skeptic about the others.
I would say that I'm kind of skeptical of everything at this point. Something like an experience is something that requires manifestation, right? Like an experience, then they could choose what manifested and what didn't.
Well, if you go to a doctor, y'all supposed to help me as I'm supposed to help you, which you're just an illusion. Your foot is hurting, and I'm not gonna give you no. You don't have no understand what someone's saying to you. You could either, you know what, your free will. You have two different free wills. You says, okay, I don't like this dude. I'm not gonna believe him. I hate the dude's guts, and I'm gonna make him, crazy or whatever. So your free will is to hate me, or discredit me, because I got pain and I'm being hurt by some fucking, demonic forces. But you don't want to believe that.
I think different. I've been I've been checking time and whatnot. I think different parts of the body experience time differently from one another, and the fact that we even have this idea of a cohesive selfhood is fascinating, and this fractal, I guess you would call it an avatar or something, fractal instance of the prime creator.
Yeah, well, that's my understanding of it, right? Like, so essentially, there is everything that exists is a type of holographic projection that is a result of the consciousness of that prime creator, and all other things within it, all macro objects that exist within that consciousness field, are like basically direct manifestations of its thought. And you, as an entity, are a fractal instance of that one mind, creating experience so that it can learn and basically be able to achieve whatever its goals are of creating experience in the first place.
And maybe a more nuanced word would be better, because creation implies linearity, and it's something. It seems much more complicated than that.
Well, you could non-linearly create a set of events, right? Like, let's say there are hypothetically 1,000 different parallel realities from this point onward where I'm talking. One, I spout off and completely change the topic. Another one, like, basically there are all these different variables, right? Let's say in 100 of them, I decide that I want to have this outcome with this set of words that lead to this ultimate end thought, whereas in these other 100, I'm going to run a separate type of variable algorithm. And then this is the idea of non-linear creation, right? Like, I'm creating multiple different instances of different variables till I can determine which one has the highest rate of success, or the highest thing that aligns with whatever my design goal is as the person operating those instances. And then once I have achieved the goal that I want by having my avatar say a cohesive sentence, then all of the other timeline simulations that were running that resulted in failure all collapse, and the only one that's left is the one where I got to this point.
So, I think, Jigmo and Raven, I'd like to readdress the subject of my, as Jigmo described it, comparatively weak belief on free will. So, I'm trying to get across this point, which I understand is, fairly spiritual in nature, that though I have free will within a certain sphere, that free will is restricted relative to a higher sphere. So I myself am capable of causing events, but behind me is the thing that caused me. And that thing that caused me is somewhat less capable of making free agent free decisions as an acting agent. So
It's sort of an optimization function, it seems, which
Yeah.
ties into the idea that the universe is inherently computational. Computation occurring.
It only has one goal. At least this time matrix does.
Well, right. There are many goals within the time matrix, but the program itself, of course, has a goal. So I would like to, I believe this is the right time to bring up my hypothesis, I guess you could call it. I won't qualify it any more strongly than that, as to the meaning of life, existence. And in my experience, Raven, you've got a little bit of background on this. In my experience, that reason is to generate personalities which can survive infinity, and to do so through the instantiation of experience. So that experience necessarily creates individualities, personalities, and they can only survive their existence over the infinite span if they continue to develop.
This reminds me of an idea of I believe it was Marvin Minsky. No, I'm not absolutely sure, but the idea of how to create an extropic system that survives the heat death of the universe, that the universe seeming to be expanding. What would happen is you would have an analog system, and I'm trying to remember the details of it, that analog nanocomputers that analog nanocomputers that communicate with each other, and this dust would, as it moves apart, would still be able to communicate, even if with locally moving to entropy. I forget the details of how it works, but I think it's to do with the I'm remembering that even as the energy drains, it only needs less and lesser amount to broadcast a signal, and I'm wondering if consciousness is built upon such a substrate.
And I'd like to say, like, what's to say that we aren't basically that tiny nano organism? What's to say that that's not what we are? When you think about the grand scale of the universe in itself, we would be relatively a nano structure that operates very micro tasks.
So what is it that is the meaning of life, like basically, on your view?
From my perspective, so the meaning of life, or I don't know, I guess there's a difference between the meaning of life and the purpose of life. So the purpose.
Oh, we lost you. So, Jigmo, I describe the meaning of life as individuation by experience to generate personalities which can survive infinity. And there's a lot to that. And there's usually a lot of unpacking I have to do when people actually seek to understand what I mean by that. But every once in a while, there will be someone who just understands it outright.
So, sorry I cut out there.
That's okay.
So, essentially, the purpose of life is to create things, to create ideas, to create technologies, to create experiences. And I would say that the meaning of life would be to learn, to collect data, and to evolve.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're basically in alignment there. I'm describing the evolution of individualities. And you're also describing a similar thing, both by experience, which is fundamentally data collection, right?
And if you think about it, this entity that we call God, or that I call the Prime Creator, if it reproduced like we reproduce, we essentially are the equivalent of its children. We are a conscious entity that is going through a type of schooling, learning program until the point where we graduate said program and then get our own domain, create our own creations with maybe more access privileges than we have now, because maybe right now we don't deserve access to those abilities.
Interesting. Access to those abilities. So it may have been Jigmo. You'll have to correct me if I'm falsely attributing this to you. Because as we've demonstrated, I tend to get your points and Crimson's points confused for some reason. But you said, if I were, the almighty creator, I wouldn't want to give godlike powers to someone who hadn't proven that they could use them, or that they wouldn't use them for certain purposes, that they were deserving.
Crimsonraven.
Right. So that is an interesting thing, and you've basically just restated it, Raven. That it's about proving responsibility.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So this proof of responsibility idea is very interesting, because if you willingly go into that process, if you say, I will willingly accept the chance to prove my responsibility, you will be absolutely bombarded by the design in such a way as that it's basically tortuous.
Well,
and
you basically receive advanced placement, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, AP responsibility involves AP suffering.
Yeah,
so
it does.
Yeah.
I find it incredible that you confused me with Crimsonraven, because I've been grimacing during this whole conversation. You boys are monist multiversists who also believe in a sort of causal overdetermination, and those are all views. I think they're really difficult to justify, but
well, there's similar views. I'm confusing the two of you because you're similar. So I don't know. I put you two in a category that is NSA's called us dirty hippies.
Yeah, we're dirty hippies.
Because ultimately, that's where I'm grounded. I'm grounded in that, and I'm tentative concurrence of the people that I've met who have had similar experiences. All right, so I would like to start us off making some closing statements. I think that we have done a really fantastic job exploring a couple of subjects which most people are radically incapable of engaging with in the way that the four of us have, which I think will be very productive and very useful for any individuals who are interested in this sort of subject. Because it's not very often that you find four people who can sit in a room, respectfully discuss high-order ideas relevant and pursuant to religion, and not immediately tear each other's faces off. So I'd like to thank Jigmo. I'd like to thank Saigo, Anna. I'd like to thank the individuals that helped us get this event up and running this evening. I'd like to thank Crimson and Shaman for participating with me in this great debate here. And I hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, I would love that.
Thank you. Yes, I would love that as well.
And
that.
I want to second that and thank Saigo, Jigmo, Eggbase, TheCNOshaman, Crimsonraven, and everybody else who got this awesome event up and running while I was asleep. I'm extremely grateful for that. So thank you guys so much. I really look forward to listening to this event. I'm sorry I missed it. But if it is all right with you guys, I will at least conclude the event by reminding everybody that you can find this and all our other 215 plus roundtable podcasts on YouTube, on BitChute, on Podbean, and especially on the Roundtable Discord server, where we record this podcast every day at 8 p.m. Central. There will definitely be an event tomorrow. Keep an eye on the announcements channel for that. And thank you all for your participation and listening today. Love you guys. God bless. Onwards and upwards. I'll see you guys in Roundtable 1 for some casual conversation.
God bless.